You're gonna take it? Okay, cool. Is that okay? Yeah, that's cool. Excellent. Look at this. It's me. It's me. It's me. Okay. You guys can hear me, right? Oh, there we go. Yeah. Wow. I can't believe how exciting it was today. I haven't seen people here for like 20 years. It's really great to have everybody here. We're just waiting for a few minutes, or what do you think? We can go. You think we can go? All right, good, excellent. So thank you very much for coming. I really appreciate it. A little housekeeping here. If you need to go to the washroom, go out the doors, make a right, and male and female washrooms are there, as well as gender-neutral washrooms. If you really need to rush out, just go straight through that door, and the washrooms are on your right-hand side. Don't worry about it. You can get in and out, even though it says you need a pass card. So don't worry about that. There's water, obviously, at the back. If you need to get a drink, feel free to get up. Or we have a lot of wonderful graduate students who are volunteering today. Just put your hand up, and they'll rush one over to you, okay? Yeah, thanks, guys. Yeah. I convinced them to come up, so it was nice that they showed up. We're going to start with the land acknowledgement, and we've just recently changed the land acknowledgement, and I forgot to memorize it. So, Toronto is in the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas, the Haudenosaunee, that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. Thank you very much. So, welcome. I have a little bit of a speech I have to give, so I'm going to start with that. So welcome to the Animation and Visual Effects Town Hall, hosted by the Creative School. You're in the Creative School today. I'm your host, Michael Carter. I'm the creative, holy cow, that's like a shot in the past. I'm the director of the Creative School Pro, which is our industry upskilling school. And if anybody is interested later on, happy to have a conversation. We're partnered with CASO and we've developed the workshop series in production management. I guess I'm uniquely qualified to host this event as I'm a 30-year veteran in the animation and visual effects industry and one of the first past presidents of CASO. So thank you very much for allowing me to be here. We hope this town hall is the first of many. It was organized by 3 integral nonprofit organizations that support your industry. These organizations are led and staffed by passionate artists, business leaders who, while also working at their day jobs, work tirelessly for the benefit of the animation and visual effects industry. And as I can say as past president of CASO, that is 100% true. So you've got your studio job during the day and then everything else for the industry at night. TAAFI, which stands for the Toronto Animation Arts Festival International, is an organization that celebrates animation and its creators. They host events like the Film Festival, the Industry Conference, and the Job Fair, which this year will be combined into one significant event spanning 5 days between April 19th and the 13th. And be sure to get your tickets. Just on a side note, we are hosting part of the TAAFI event this year as well. So thank you very much, TAAFI, for allowing us to do so. The VES Toronto is the Visual Effects Society, a global organization that represents visual effects professionals in Canada and around the world. Its role is to provide education, foster community and industry recognition, and honor the best visual effects work of the previous year through the VES Awards. And they run a mean party, so I would highly recommend, if you're not a If you're not part of the VES, you should definitely apply. CASO represents the membership of over 30 computer animation studios of Ontario Studios. Its board of 12 directors represents its membership and works daily to advance the global competitiveness of Ontario's animation and visual effects industry through government advocacy, professional development, and marketing initiatives. And in short, the collaboration of these three organizations, artists and business coming together to share information so that we can find a path forward. Ontario Creates, we're very pleased to have them here, as always. They've been fantastic supporters. Is also integral to our industry. It is a provincial government agency whose mandate is to be a catalyst for economic development, investment, and collaboration in Ontario's creative industries. We are honored to have Ontario Creates Justin Cutler and Ontario's Film Commissioner as our panel moderator today. Justin is responsible for promoting Ontario domestically and internationally as a premier production location. He also provides direct services to film and television production, decision makers to facilitate access to location and services. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming, and Justin, it's all yours.
Thanks, Michael, and good evening, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here for what I think is now the first annual town hall call, and I just really wanted to thank VES, CASO, and TAAFI for putting this together. Events like these really do show the strength of our jurisdiction in Ontario, and it really has become envied across the world, the fact that we can get together and have these conversations and hopefully demystify some myths along the way and really help our industry move forward. As Michael mentioned, I oversee film commission services for Ontario Creates, and through that job, I work with over 150 to 180 productions annually and try to attract that business to the province. And through that experience, I get to hear firsthand what productions like about working in Ontario. Obviously, they like our competitive financial incentives, our tax credits, our infrastructure, our locations, etc. But most importantly, they come here because we have great people who work in the province, and all of you are evidence of that. And I know you're probably asking, well, things have been a little slower for visual effects and animation work, and I think we're really going to dig into what the reality is of that landscape, what production looks like in the province, and what it can look like in the future, and really get to the core of how we can move forward as a stronger community. Luckily, we've got some fantastic people here to help us navigate these waters, and so I'm just going to introduce our panel. First, we've got Mark Jones, who is an educator, writer, film producer, and frequent strategist to arts organizations across Canada. He's the Dean of the Faculty of Animation, Art, and Design at Sheridan College, Canada's largest art school, with internationally recognized programs in animation, filmmaking, design, performance, and material arts. So welcome, Mark. Yeah. At the end, we have Krista Tazio-Morrison, who brings 25 years of experience in the film and television industry as an accomplished VFX and post executive. She is currently the executive VFX producer at the Emmy-nominated VFX studio Rocket Science. She's worked on widely celebrated projects including Spotlight, Game of Thrones, and The Handmaid's Tale, and she's currently working on the next season of Tim Burton's Wednesday. Krista was a founding member of the Toronto section of the Visual Effects Society and sits on a number of advisory committees, both to the City of Toronto and Ontario Creates. Welcome, Krista. Next, we've got Lawrence Sumet, who is the head of technology at VFX Studio, the chair of the Visual Effects Society of Toronto, and a professor of VFX and animation at Centennial College. He's also worked as a supervisor and VFX artist at companies such as Soho VFX and Nirvana. Welcome. Yeah. And we have Sherry Azim. Where's Sherry? There's Sherry, okay. Sherry is an HR leader, entrepreneur, and speaker specializing in talent acquisition, workplace culture, and ethical AI in HR. She's the founder of Source Nerds, connecting top talent with industry leaders while driving innovative HR solutions. Currently, she's developing a salary survey for Canada's animation and visual effects industry to promote transparency and equity across the sector. It's slated to be released, I think, next week. So welcome, Sherry. Yeah. We have Karen Jackson, who currently works as both chair and executive director at TAAFI and as a professor at Seneca Polytechnic in several programs across the School of Creative Arts and Animation. Welcome. Great. I think we can all head over. Yeah. And oh, sorry, it's coming. And last but not least, I'd also like to introduce you to Melissa Graham. Melissa is an award-winning animation producer with over 25 years of experience in the animation industry. A Sheridan Animation alumni, Melissa is currently serving as Nelvana's Director of Production, overseeing all original co-produced 2D and CG animation content. In 2024, Melissa joined CASO's board of directors, supporting animation and visual effects studios across the province. So I think we can whatever. So just I have a couple additional housekeeping notes of my own. The state of the industry in Ontario for visual effects and animation is a big subject. We are going to do our best to cover as much ground in the next hour and a half as we can. We'll certainly leave some time for some questions at the end. But what we've done is really tried to respond to the questions that you submitted as part of your registration form so we can cover the information that's relevant to you all. I do believe that this session is being recorded and will also be distributed afterwards. So if you miss anything, please do check that out or send it to people who can't make it here today. And then finally, because this is going to be very much a kind of a high altitude conversation, there's going to be a number of other meetings and sessions at future festivals and markets where we'll really be able to dig into some of these subjects at a deep level. But today is really about understanding the lay of the land in production and in the province. Okay, so I think with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mark, who's going to give us a forward to the conversation and do a bit of level setting for the industry. So over to you.
Please hold for a technical setup. We're just doing this to build a drama. Okay. Okay, good to go. Okay, folks, we have 15 minutes to get through 10 years of history. Can we do it? Are we ready? Here we go. So, welcome to How We Got Here, or Why Can't I Find a Job in Animation and Visual Effects? Okay, let's start with the fact that Canada's screen industries have always been a mix of homegrown and service work. Sometimes these were shows that were produced and distributed in Canada only. Down the road, some of these may have gained international distribution. Others were developed specifically to be placed across global channels. And some shows had no IP connections to Canada at all and were simply made here for foreign producers. The question of IP is at the heart of how we got here. Stories and other creative assets that originate and are produced in Canada count as domestic production, even if they are intended for global distribution. Likewise, if the story originates outside of Canada, but is made here on behalf of their foreign owners, it's counted as a foreign service production. Ontario Creates tracks the mix of these domestic and foreign productions in the province. You can see in the graph the basic trend over a 20-year period. Domestic production actually tracked or outweighed foreign production for much of this time period, but the trend started changing in 2017. And foreign has been a much larger part of the creative economy, except in the very recent past. That rapid rise and sudden drop near the end of the graph is largely what brings us here today. So let's look at some of the underlying causes of this. Here's a graph of the Canadian economy from 1997 to 2023. It's mostly a nice smooth line going upwards with two bumps, one in 2008 and one in 2020 during the pandemic. Here's the same time period for the film and television sector. A little bump here, right? So what's going on here? Essentially, this is the story of the sector's transition from analog to digital and how that transition created changes in production methods, business models, and audience consumption habits. Responses by governments to the sudden increase in foreign production after the streaming model became popular helped to ensure Canada was well positioned to take advantage of that. But it's still not a smooth curve, in part because Canada's domestic IP now had more foreign competition for international distribution. If we were to zoom into the pandemic and after time frame, we see a period of sustained high levels of activity. There were a few factors that contributed to this. Animation and VFX studios were able to pivot to online production quickly in the early stages of COVID. Provinces also allowed live action production to resume soon after safety protocols were in place. But the rapid increase in production was driven almost entirely by the streamers, who had different business models than the more traditional media companies and distributors. And during this period, studios were experiencing many challenges in keeping up with production. Those of you who were in the industry and working at studios like this probably remember that time period where there was a lot of activity going on and a lot of the studios didn't know how to keep up. But once subscriber growth started to slow, as we came out of the pandemic, these streamers started to pull back on their content spend. From an economic standpoint, the sector peaked in December 2022. The strikes then hit in 2023, and things took a further turn for the worst. What the industry is experiencing now is a reconfiguration from these events. But the conditions for that reconfiguration are not the same as they were before. For starters, the number of streamers continues to grow, and they are dominated by US players who increasingly control both the production and the distribution of their acquired or commissioned IP. This means that on the whole, like other jurisdictions, Ontario is more dependent upon foreign service production to maintain the industry. Agencies like Telefilm and Ontario Creates are working hard to ensure support for the domestic side of the industry while this persists. In Canada, we have two domestically owned streaming services, Crave and Gem. Gem does not publish their subscriber numbers because rightly they say that the service is an extension of their broadcast channels and that viewership matters more than subscribers. Crave, on the global ranking of streamers that do share their subscriber numbers, places 39th globally with 3.2 million subscribers. But as we just mentioned, subscribers do not necessarily equal viewers. In a recent talk by Michael Hirsch, gesturing towards Michael Hirsch, that he recently did at OCAD-U, he quoted that Crave had a 0.6% share of the Canadian viewership, 0.6, and that Gem has a 0.3% share. So we may be downloading these Canadian streaming apps, but we're not using them as much as we are the others. Add to that the corresponding decline in viewership in traditional cable TV and specialty channels, which for many years, and thanks to some CRTC regulations, contributed to support domestic production. But they are under increasing pressure to find global markets for their series because that's where the revenue potential lies. And that can affect the stories that are told. In other words, are they actually Canadian stories? Some have had some great success with this, though the two examples that most people think of is Schitt's Creek and Kim's Convenience, which are largely exceptions in terms of the scale of that success. Examples in animation like Paw Patrol show that we still have the talent and the means to create global sensations, but it can take some effort to make clear to foreign sources that these originate in Ontario. Okay, so what does all this add up to? The first theme is that there are fewer productions than during the pandemic peak, and the budgets are now lower. This is a graph created from Ontario Creates data. The first two bars for each year are domestic animation and live action, followed by foreign. The number at the top of each bar represents the number of projects that year. Bear in mind, this data captures production that went through an Ontario Creates program only and will not include those which did not. But the lion's share of projects that is the focus of this discussion will have. If you were to compare animation production before and after the pandemic, you can see there are fewer productions than before and the overall spend is lower. The foreign live action side is where you see the changes most pronounced. These figures are where you will find the visual effects service work and post-production. There are now more productions happening in Ontario than there were before the pandemic, but the spend was less than half in 2023 than it was in 2022. Again, due mainly to the strikes and the changes in content spend by foreign production companies. This all means there are fewer jobs to go around. The Canadian Media Producers Guild confirmed in the report released just before the holidays that the sector had seen a decline in jobs of over 22% nationally from the previous year. And bear in mind that when seasoned workers lose their jobs, it means that the younger emerging talent are now competing with them for many of those same positions. So for as much as we're seeing how difficult it is for everyone, we should also recognize that it's the new talent from our education programs who have graduated into very different conditions that existed than when they started those programs, which was still in the heyday before many of these factors affected the industry. And this brings up an important question. In the college sector, where most of these grads are coming from, our programs historically have been designed to prepare a labor force for a domestic and foreign service industry because that's where the jobs have been, and the colleges are measured on employment. So what happens when the business conditions for that service sector changes? How must our programs respond to these, and how must government policy change to support that? I'll have one possible answer to that question in a few minutes. On the university side, Ontario has strong programming in fine arts and media, with TMU, York, and OCAD-U being three notable examples that have specific programming for gaming and digital media, filmmaking, and animation, respectively. But they too are under pressure to demonstrate how their grads, many of whom in film prefer to work in above-the-line creative leadership roles, can find such work in an increasingly competitive production environment controlled largely by foreign entities. For those who graduate from programs more rooted in fine art studio practice, how can they develop the skills needed to gain employment in a changing service sector or work as successful independent practitioners? Okay, that's a lot of information. So now let's look at a summary of the changes. Essentially, there have been three major trends. The business models of content creation have changed. Foreign commissioners play a larger role than they used to, and domestic ones have consolidated to compete. Competition for those foreign-based productions is more global since the pandemic. In Canada, we're used to speaking of competition for service work as existing between the provinces. But those foreign service commissioners are looking at it more globally because the pandemic showed that remote work could be effective anywhere as long as the talent and the technology was there. Let's not forget that a big driver of all of this as well are the different choices now being made by audiences who are choosing to go to the movie theaters less, but spending big bucks on rich immersive experiences like Taylor Swift concerts. The incentives offered by jurisdictions around the world continue to play a key role in continuing to attract both foreign service work as well as support domestic productions. The recent announcement by Quebec's government to cap their tax credits has cost many jobs. And more recent announcements by BC and California may create additional pressure for Ontario to ensure its incentives are competitive. The likelihood is that the recent fires in Los Angeles will strengthen the political will in California to enable its film sector to rebuild and bring back some of the business that it's lost over the last number of years. This could have effects for places like Ontario too. So this all sounds pretty depressing. Thank you, have a good night. No. But look, there are some bright spots and some interesting trends that we want to start focusing on now. For starters, Ontario remains a highly competitive place for production, and the province's more recent strategy towards infrastructure development, including initiatives like Ontario Green Screen, which works to reduce the carbon footprint of live action production, continues to attract. And the province's approach to stable tax credits with no cap or sunset clauses makes it a differentiator compared to other places. The province's production, training, and talent infrastructure remains one of the best in the world and was at the root of the building of the industry in the beginning. And these things matter. In a report issued just last weekend, as noted by the Hollywood Reporter, film executives in LA listed Toronto as their top choice for production in the world. And look, everybody's thinking tariffs, so I'll just say one thing about tariffs. And we don't yet know precisely what the potential impacts of these may be if they're implemented after this brief reprieve, but at least one report has speculated that it may actually increase production in Canada because of its likely effects of depressing the Canadian dollar. And new markets for production have also emerged in recent years, opening the possibility of diversifying service work beyond the United States. Canada is well positioned for this due to the existence of nearly 60 co-production treaties with countries around the world. Okay, so it's reasonable to speculate that the province will continue to see a gradual increase in production levels compared to these last couple of years. But many people I speak to seem to think that it won't return to the same levels that we saw during the heights of the pandemic. So this is no longer the case of just waiting it out like it has been in previous downturns. The shifts in global competitiveness and business and distribution models means that we're in a somewhat new territory. And this is where it gets interesting because it means there's a heightened need for reinvention. So everything we've discussed up to now has been about the industrial institutional side of the field, primarily focused on the entertainment sector. And yes, these sectors will continue to be influenced by new technologies like AI. But we're increasingly seeing the trend of young independent animators create their own shorts for distribution, primarily on YouTube and TikTok. And before you scoff at this, consider that this segment of the media ecology continues to grow and generate revenue. YouTube today has nearly 9 times the user base of Netflix. And half of those users are teens and young adults. It's no wonder producers today are not launching many new shows for teens and instead focusing more on preschool, kids, and adults. So maybe the opportunities presented by the tools and the networks that enable new independent voices to find a home and an audience brings us full circle. Because before there was any kind of industry that we have today, before other places looked to Canada as a place to produce their content. There was just a lot of homegrown experimentation and chance-taking. They didn't require enormous budgets, but they had to be willing to be a little weird, and some of these shows were a little weird. And that's a good thing. Because we're living in a time in which stuff that starts on YouTube and through tenacious independent voices are pushing the field towards finding success. And when a strange show about a toilet can attract investment from major producers. So the polished industry that we know today started with radical filmmakers who animated using light tables made from toilets and accountants dressed as Gandalf. And everyone should read Michael Hirsch's book if you don't know the stories of these things. So, you know, maybe we need to get a little bit weird again. YouTube recently changed its requirements and algorithms to enable a new generation of creators to attract an audience and generate income from that. And yes, taking this on is like a job unto itself with learning those algorithms and the strategies to sustain them, but is more likely the place where we'll see the next generation of experimentation happen. And if you're interested in looking into this, it'll be important to understand what the revenue sources are and how they differ somewhat in Canada compared to the US. But generating some degree of income on these platforms is possible. This recent article gives an excellent overview. That QR code will come back at the end of the presentation. Okay, the challenge though is if you sought support to get something like this off the ground, you'll likely find you're on your own because currently neither of the province's creative content funding agencies have figured out where to place independent animation or live action works that are distributed independently with commercial intentions through such platforms. This might be where the opportunity for government and education can come in. Because by working together, we can better prepare creative talent for that new part of the screen-based economy and enable them more of the support they need to demonstrate the role they are eager to play in taking the industry into the future. In the meantime, remember, you belong not just to an industry, but to a community. And that engaging in the community is the way in which it stays vibrant and supportive. So keep applying for the jobs, but consider spending a little less time on polishing your demo reel. It's probably fine already. And shift into learning how the field is pushing the boundaries of other industries. And consider making part of your career goals, creating your own projects that could help you build an audience for your own work. If you do that, remember, you're not doing it to impress a hiring manager or a creative director. You're doing it for yourself and for the people who will enjoy your work. So don't be afraid to be a little bit weird. In fact, the weirder the better, because the weird is where the future lies, for yourself and for the industry. Thank you.
Bring all the panelists back up. Krista, there you go. You know, I think that Mark presented some hope in that conversation, and I think that's a really important place to start. And I did want to start with the studio response, both from a visual effects and animation point of view. I mean, we've seen at Ontario Creates our production volumes in the province now doubling over last year in terms of production in January. And we've also seen our location scouting increase by about 30%, which I think is hopeful for the province. But of course, that business trickles down gradually. So I wanted to turn it over to Krista to hear what you're hearing from clients about orders and commissioned work. So over to you.
Thank you. Is this on? Are we on? No. Switcheroo. Yeah, I think Mark really encapsulated a lot of what's been happening. You know, certainly the peak and the valley were great between the strike and sort of the rebound that we're looking to feel. It's slowly trickling back. I think that, you know, with visual effects being more so a post-process for the mainstay of the work, the increases that you're seeing now, we'll start to see, you know, 6 to 9 months down the road once they edit and turn the work over. So for us, there continues to be still this sort of lull.
Okay, great. And Melissa, maybe we'll go to you from the animation point of view.
Just talk into it. I was going to say, do you want to take this spot? No? I'm just blue.
I can hear you. Yeah.
Yeah, I think from the animation sector for studios, it's really tough. I mean, we're seeing right sizing, we're seeing sadly some layoffs, and I think everybody tried to predict how long this would run, and that just keeps getting extended and extended. So I think the reaction of studios is just, you know, they continue to collaborate, continue to follow up with existing partnerships, with existing industry players, and really digging deep into what budgets look like. We know that, you know, as Mark mentioned, sadly, the assumption is budgets have to get smaller, but the reality is the quality of work is still going to be the quality of work. So I think it's being innovative into how we sustain great quality when things pick up. But in the meantime, where are audiences? They're on the streaming platforms, they're on YouTube. So in talking to some studios and just seeing myself, what's happened is you see a lot of short content going up. I've noticed instead of long form projects being greenlit, greenlighting is just difficult in general, but there's shorter content, 13 episodes, or even a special or a series of 5 or 6 shorts. And in a way, it makes sense. If the audience is gravitating to those platforms, you can test your product, see if it resonates with an audience, and then make a future investment. So I think we're seeing two sides of the spectrum, and talking with folks tonight, there's your cheap and cheerful, and there's your premium. So your features and shorter content, which I think is going to help everybody move forward.
That's great. And Lawrence, maybe we'll bring you in here as well. I mean, how are you seeing the right sizing of labor in relation to trying to maintain the quality that clients expect?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I mean, you brought up the clients, and they're going through the same things we're all going through, right? They have to do a lot more with less. And so, you know, I think the approach is being honest and transparent. Right? Like having that conversation and building that strong partnership so that we're working together to get it done, but taking advantage of more being less. And I think, you know, where we've seen a lot of benefit there is in having great, you know, production staff, administration, and training and being invested there. Like, for example, there's a great new program here at TMU in terms of training producers, for example. Having good frontline employees who deal with the clients means that there's less churn, and we can do more with less. I think the other side of it too is in the artists. You know, at our studio, we always try and find places where people can fit in. If there's a department that's not seeing as much work in a downturn, we'll see if we can try and move people to another department. So I think from an artist perspective, being more versatile and kind of leaning a little bit more into the generalist side of things can be a big advantage, especially when we're going through a downturn.
That's great. You know, and in terms of the workforce, we've seen a move to a hybrid work environment over the years, and that's worked as a way to attract the workforce to our industry. I'm curious to know if you think that's around to stay, and I know it's looking into a crystal ball a bit, but are you seeing any client-driven demands that might change that from a security point of view?
I'll jump in. I'm curious to hear from Krista too on this. You know, it's tricky. It really depends on the project and the client. Security definitely kind of went through a reset in the pandemic. And that whole model of, oh, if you want to work on this big project, everybody has to be in the studio kind of went away because it had to. And I think we all realized we can do this remote. It is possible and it's productive, but there are challenges. And so the way we're approaching it is really like it depends on the client I am expecting at some point we might see a client who comes in and says, if you want to work on this project, everybody's got to be in the same secure room. And that's cool, and we want to be ready for that. At the same time, we want to support the opportunity in having remote workers, because I think, one of the things we've seen, VES did a survey, and we heard from a lot of people, I think Sherry also heard similar stories, that one of the things that allowed people to survive in some ways through this crisis and the pandemic was being able to move to cheaper places to live and continue to work. So to me, that's kind of a critical factor there. Yeah. What do you think, Krista?
Let's hear from Krista as well on that.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely agree that it is not a one-size-fits-all. Different studios take different approaches. I think it depends on the projects and the pressure points. We did see a lot of inefficiencies sort of spring up through remote work. And when you're in a competitive environment right now, you're focused on those inefficiencies and where you can kind of fill the gap. So that we can be more efficient to do more with less. I think that, overall, try and speak for most, you try to be cognizant that we have had a shift to remote work. But the conversation is really how do we work together? If a project needs everyone in on the front end to talk about, some creative brainstorming, start to set the footprint, how we're casting people into projects. If we find that there's a lot of efficiency in building the team that way, and then you kind of spread out, let people work in more of a remote capacity, and then when you come back to that other pressure point of delivering, are we on time? Are we on schedule? Do we need to kind of pull everyone back in and work a little bit tighter together? Those are some of the discussions we have. In terms of the clients, they really, leave it up to the studios, and we thank them for that trust, for sure.
And Sherry, you've worked so closely with talent across the province. What are you hearing from them in terms of their wants and needs when working at studios?
Well, I think what just came out of the survey, I think it was almost like 65% of people are currently working remotely. So I think from an HR perspective, it is a benefit for, studios to be able to leverage that. Like, if you're really top talent and you are looking for top talent, it's easier to, but it isn't one size fits all. If somebody's not interested, because some people do want to go into the office, it isn't one size fits all. It's like, I think that benefit should be a benefit if that's what they want to do. So I could see more of it happening when it comes to recruiting top talent. Yeah.
Great, thank you. I think we should probably turn our attention to the technological changes that are at stake in the industry right now. And Lawrence, as our kind of resident technologist, I wanted to turn to you. What technological changes are you seeing that are making studios more competitive, and what can we build on?
I think one of the coolest things I've seen is collaboration between studios. And I think we go back, a decade or two, things were maybe a bit more competitive. And now we're seeing, there's a lot of people getting on. When we were building a VFX studio, people reached out and they said, hey, here's something you should know. And that was a huge help to us. People believed in us and they worked with us. And I think, number one, that collaborative environment is an advantage we can have competitively. If we look at kind of Ontario as having capacity to take on bigger jobs, I think it's going to come through all of us kind of working together and sharing. Don't give away the secret sauce, but help prop each other up. I think to me that's number one. Number two is there are areas we can invest, I think, that are going to really kind of put us forward as an industry. AI is an obvious one. There's a lot of hype around it, and it's really hard for people to cut through that hype, I think. But there are tons of really clear applications that are coming through. You think about denoising and rendering that has drastically cut down render time. That's a huge impact. And these are things that aren't replacing people's jobs. They're just allowing us to do more with less, which is, I think, a pattern we keep seeing here. So I think AI, cloud, real-time, virtual production, we're pushing in all these areas. but more funding opportunities. I think people, they may not know about the funding opportunities that are there in Ontario, things like SRED and other things from Ontario Creates. There's a lot out there that can help you build a studio. And so I think that's a great step. And I think the last bit is, in this room even, we have, a lot of the software that we use on a daily basis, like Houdini from Side Effects, is developed right here in Toronto. And I think Side Effects has been great about engaging with the community here to build better software and work together. And I think the more we engage on that, the more we take advantage of that competitive advantage of being local and having a community. We also have the research body. I mean, U of T is over there. That's basically where computer graphics was kind of invented. So there's a lot of intelligence and smarts in our community here. And I think if we all work together even further, we could really give ourselves a competitive advantage.
So that's a great point. I mean, I think we could go down a real rabbit hole with AI for sure. But I mean, I think that I'd really like to key into some of the technology that we're seeing that could actually make our artists' lives easier and also make our companies smarter without that job loss. So maybe without talking about generative AI too much, maybe I'll just stay with you, Lawrence, and I'd love to go to Sherry about this as well. But what advantages do you see right now with AI and supporting the workforce?
Well, I think, so in the pattern of more with less, and I think Mark pointed out something really interesting in that we can see more independent creators maybe coming out and having more of a platform. And what I think is really cool is that, you go back 10 years, opening up a little studio was a very expensive thing. It took a lot. If you want to get 5 people together and start a studio, you can do it in the cloud. You're paying for what you use, nothing up front. You can use open source software like Aeon Pipeline or something like that. It's really easy. It's so much easier to build a little studio and produce a product. And I think there's things that are coming from the AI development that are just going to help that along. Like, for example, I use denoising. Render costs, you used to need a massive render farm. When you start to use things like denoising, you need less render resources. It costs less. It becomes more accessible. Beyond that, it's hard to predict the future about where things are going to go with AI. There's a lot of very interesting things that are coming out, but it's technology that's built in a different realm. It's not built in our industry, so it's hard to kind of map it to our industry. So I think the best thing we can do is try and learn the core basics, like do something like pick up Comfy UI or something like that and just get familiar with it so that as things change and we get the advantage of it, we'll be ready for it. And because I think if we don't, someone else will. So it's cool to get ahead of that. But yeah.
Yeah, great, thank you. And Sherry, maybe we'll turn to you. You've thought about AI from an HR perspective and also just for making our studios smarter and more intelligent in the way they do their work. So maybe I'll turn to you for your perception.
Yeah, I think that one thing that, like we say, less, be able to do less or more with less. And I think people think, okay, it'll be less people, and it may be less people, but people have this perception that it's going to be like we're going to go down from like 12 animators to like 2, and that will never happen. You may have like 10 to 2, like go down from like 12 to 2, but that 2 will be able to find a job in the exact same industry, but just doing something else. And I think it's important because, like Lawrence just said, if people think, okay, we're going to be replaced by AI. No, the only way you'll be replaced by AI is with somebody that knows how to use it. So it is important to use it in your discipline, learn to use it in your industry, learn to use it like when you're communicating with clients. So I think AI has gotten a bad rap, and everybody thinks that, all of these job losses is because of AI. Well, nothing has been greenlit that's so substantial that a lot of people have lost their jobs over it. So I think really it's not whether we like it or not like it. It's going to happen. It's here. It took 15 years for the internet to have 80% of the people using it. With AI, it'll take 5, where 80% of the companies are using it. And so we're already just over 2 years into it. So, if you're not using it, you're already 2 years behind. So that's what I have to say on that.
Okay, great, thanks. I mean, I think we could probably
Actually,
move.
there's one other thing, and it's about from the HR perspective. I did a talk in Manitoba for the HR Association, and I did a poll, and the question was, how will AI impact HR in the next year? So it's like, A, was it like recruiting? B, onboarding, emotional intelligence. And then the last one, I can't remember what it was. But almost 70% of the HR people that were polled said it was going to help them with emotional intelligence. So it's very interesting that they think this computer, this robot, is going to help them with emotional intelligence. And it does. You can ask it anything. Like, you're having a bad day with your boss and this happened, and like, how do I deal with that situation? And it will tell you in the most emotional intelligent way how to deal with it, because it has no bias. So, yeah.
And I think, this is really a factor for education as well. Like, if you're training people, you're training the next generation, and I think that's where it's really important that we look for those opportunities. But I mean, I've seen some really cool things. Just, there were people who would script, do technical things, and people who didn't. And with ChatGPT in the mix, all of a sudden people who weren't scripting before, hey, I just wrote this little script to automate something. And that's huge to me. Like, it's exciting. It frees a technical team to focus on bigger problems, right? So there's some really cool things happening, and we just have to kind of find the good through the bad.
And like you mentioned, it'll be able to have, what'll happen is a lot smaller studios with these independent and all these like more diverse channels be able to go on the channels that people are consuming, which are the YouTubes and the TikToks and all these small, short content.
That's great. Okay. I think we could probably turn our attention to opportunities for sector growth. There's so much to talk about on this subject in Ontario in particular. And I think I'll bring in Karen here finally. Karen, just in light of the content orders decreasing in some ways, and the streamers pulling back a little bit on their orders as well, one might think that licensing content will become a really important factor going forward, and producing content for licensing. But also, I'm curious to know what you are seeing through TAAFI and working with artists across the province, and what opportunities you see in the marketplace for company growth in Ontario.
Well, that's a big question to ask. What opportunities I see for growth in our sector. I can speak mostly from an artist perspective, not so much from a company owner's perspective, because I don't own a studio, much like the esteemed colleagues I have up here. But in terms of artists and how we're seeing how I think it's been said on the panel before, and as Mark said as well in his presentation, that there's been an increase in empowering and encouraging artists to create their own content and create their own, use the technologies that are emerging, use the platforms like YouTube and Twitch and other things to bring our audiences into the realm of the creative process, into the sphere. We're seeing animation artists that are doing process videos of how they've created their characters or different shoeboxes of their designs and things, but they're high production value videos that are really bringing people into the process and really showing their audiences not only what they're creating, but how they're creating it. And I think that there's opportunity there for individuals to sell not only the content that they're creating, but also content about the content that they're creating. So I unfortunately can only speak from an individual's perspective.
No, I think it's really helpful.
Thank you.
I'm curious, Melissa, I'd love to turn to you about the opportunities you see between public and private cooperation. CASO is doing a lot of work on this file to work with agencies like Ontario Creates or the City of Toronto or municipalities across the province. I was hoping you could reflect on some of those efforts as well.
For sure. On behalf of CASO, CASO has forged strong relationships with TAAFI, VES, OMAD, Ontario Creates, and the City of Toronto. There's three key areas that I can highlight that is definitely an area for greatest opportunities and growth. The first is tax credit modernization and stability. So a selling feature for Ontario is that our production tax credits have been stable for years thanks to the support of the Ontario government. CASO was successful in convincing the government in the spring 2024 Ontario budget to untether OCASE, which is our Ontario Computer Animation and Special Effects tax credit. So what this did was untethering it allowed industry-related tax credits. It made it easier for studios to apply and receive them. So that was a big win. To try and attract more projects to Ontario, CASO's 2025 focus, one of them is we've requested an increase in CASO to keep us competitive with the other jurisdictions who have already increased their incentives. So we've seen that already. We see what's happened in BC. So it's an important one. In addition, we requested reforms to the administration process for OCASE. And what this is suggested an early and partial payment process for producers to reduce financial burden on the studios. So right now there's quite a significant wait time, and that has many different negative impacts. But it also can highlight that money could be used to invest in other things like new technology, infrastructure, and our people. The second is an alignment with industry, like the effort tonight with VES Toronto and TAAFI. CASO partners with industry experts to educate through webinars and events like this. We also support the TAAFI job fair every year, so upcoming in April. So together with CASO Studios, with TAAFI artists, it's an important event. I have to refer to my notes. There's so many good things.
All right. Yeah, that's good.
CASO's collaborating with college education leaders, creating a provincial advisory committee to marry education with industry. So together we're drafting a minimum skills document, and this is to ensure improved outcomes for graduating students and studios. So I think this is a really important one because as we've heard tonight and in Mark's presentation and colleagues, things are changing. So it's so important that I think everyone continue to communicate, collaborate, so that the right things can get changed quickly, so that we're making sure the education sector is on par with what their skills are going to be required when they hit the job force. We're also responding to high schools to introduce animation and VFX as a career option early in education. We're also aligning with stakeholders like Film Ontario and the CMPA on opportunities for industry growth. So some examples of this is the recent CMPA submission to the CRTC on the redefinition of Canadian content. So CASO made sure that animation and VFX points contained within were properly addressed. So those are going to have an impact. So we made sure to support. And in addition, supporting requests for more resources for Ontario Creates IP Fund and a dedicated stream for film and television industry in the Skills Development Fund training stream. And last but not least, promotional partnerships. So we have two key ones, Ontario Creates and the City of Toronto. It's a critical partnership that we've worked together on. So with Ontario Creates, creating videos promoting animation and VFX, student talent and their capabilities. These videos are used by both Ontario Creates and CASO, and if you haven't seen them, I highly recommend going to the website. They're fantastic. We definitely don't have a shortfall of incredible talent, of studios and talent in Ontario, so this was important. And CASO and Ontario Creates in 2024 discussed how to best capitalize on global business development, so that was an important meeting. And OCASE, Ontario Creates invested in and were part of the CASO development of the job portal. So this is it was an important initiative, and that's to help make talent easier for studios who have job openings to find talent. So, and last but not least, the City of Toronto is another key partner of CASO's, bringing industry representation to LA to market the vitality of our film industry, which includes animation, VFX talent, and infrastructure. And of course, Ottawa International Festival, CASO is present there as well each year, and that's a globally recognized event, so that's an important one as well.
That's incredible. Yeah, I mean, there's so much work to unpack there. I mean, the job portal, I think, is a fantastic opportunity. I know there are a lot of artists in the room and artists online who should definitely check that out if you haven't already. It's the greatest way for employers to know who the available talent is in the province and when you're available. So do have a look at that. Krista, there was something that was just mentioned by Melissa about promoting Ontario abroad. And we've had the opportunity to participate on a number of missions and familiarization tours where we bring executives up to Ontario. Maybe you could just talk a little bit about, what some of those selling features are and opportunities you see going forward for promotion.
Great question. Thank you. Certainly, industry has enjoyed the support of Ontario Creates, the City of Toronto. We feel well sort of bolstered and supported. So the trade missions to Los Angeles are obviously our key market that we draw from has been big. Not only for introducing seedling companies to new clients, but also to working collectively to sell the jurisdiction and sell the strengths of our jurisdiction. Because, Toronto and Ontario is sort of small comparatively with visual effects and animation capacity compared to, say the UK or even BC or Montreal at times, depends on the swell. But we're small but mighty. We always pack, we always punch well above our weight. You look at the award shows, the VES, the Emmys, we're always represented. And that really shows that we have a strong creative brain trust. So that's one thing that I like to always, mention to the clients, because when you come to Ontario, you're getting that strength, that backbench. And then that's, married with the technology that's born out of Ontario, side effects, Waterloo. We have a strong technology sector that helps to contribute to our industry. So there's a lot of strengths that we sort of generate on our own. And then when you pair that with government, it packs, a really strong impact out there. And so I think that Ontario and Toronto in general are well positioned, with our tax incentives and our creative offerings. So, we'll just keep seeing how things roll forward.
Okay, great. I think we've worked on Ontario Creates very closely with the line producer community on physical production because they're often approached to budget for the province. I think one thing that we are interested in moving forward with the support of CASO and other organizations is really also promoting our visual effects supervisors and other key people in the animation industry. So definitely interested to hear from folks after the conversation on how we can do that in a better way. But we have just launched a website through the Film Commission where we can list talent that's available. We're not trying to duplicate the efforts of CASO's job portal, but there are some of these positions that are critical to share with folks who are working abroad and thinking about working in Ontario. But beyond LA, I'm curious, if anyone wants to jump in on this, what can we do with the global marketplace? I mean, I think there are many opportunities for animation co-productions going forward, and we may have to rely on soft money from various jurisdictions to make these productions happen. So, does anyone have any thoughts about how we can work with other treaty co-production countries? Maybe Melissa, I'll turn to you.
Yeah, I think right now the key is, we need people to buy, and we need people who want to buy to have the funds. So we see a lot of gaps in finance models. What has typically been there, it's been a portion of that budget has been funded by our linear broadcasters, and when that's missing, it becomes difficult. So I think exploring, if it can't be a co-production, what about a three-way co-production? And you see multiple variations of budgets being done to really exhaust every possible option. So I think that's a message I want to share for everyone, is it isn't with the effort. There's major efforts to try to get green lights. It's just sometimes it's a project that people love. It's just getting the funds together to get it off the ground. So yeah, exploring any options I think is really key. So it's reaching out to, like the meeting we had, where have you been approached? Has Ontario Creates been approached by others looking for studios that they can potentially contact and discuss some options? I think that's the key right now, is to communicate. Just don't stop communicating. Share what you're experiencing is a little bit different than what's been a trend, and explore if there's a viable option there.
That's great to hear. I mean, I think we're making best efforts wherever possible to be in the markets where these conversations are being had, to support our producers, and we'll definitely have a presence in Berlin and in Cannes and a number of other markets. So if you are producers in the room that need support in those markets, let us know. I think we should probably turn our attention to opportunities for professional development. We've got a lot of artists on the line in the room who I think are thinking about how they can make themselves more marketable in this really tough marketplace. So maybe Sherry, I'll turn to you next. What are some of the strategies that visual effects and animation workers can take to remain employable in this current context?
I think definitely, lifetime learning is essential, especially in this particular industry, because we're so reliant on technology. So, definitely upskilling. If you currently are not, employed, take courses. If you can't afford to take the courses, then take the free. There's a lot of free courses. Reach out to people and network. Learn together, collaborate, and upskilling. Number one thing. Learn to use, I know it's a really bad word, AI. Learn to use AI for your discipline. It's super important.
And I'm curious, what are some of the ways where film workers can upskill and develop their skill set? There are clearly a lot of resources available through TAAFI, VES, but Karen, maybe you can touch on some of this.
Through TAAFI alone, you have a lot of opportunities to learn more and kind of grow. We run our events not because we think that the content is cool and we just want to get this speaker who might be interesting in. We actually listen to our community and pick programming that aligns with what we feel and what we've heard from our community about what they need to learn in order to adapt to today's technologies, to changing trends, to different things that are, growing or new styles. How we talk to our community is that animation is kind of in its renaissance period, where we're rediscovering what it means to be an artist in this industry and be not only an individual, but kind of grow yourself as an artist and kind of be your own business in a way. We've recognized in history that, like, photography, for example, made it so that painters were like, oh, well, I don't need to paint. No, that doesn't happen. It's the same with AI. Okay, AI can do a thing, but in terms of the renaissance of animation, what that really means is that it's a renewal of the artistry of individual artists. And I think that in terms of artists who are interested in growing themselves, not trying to be like everybody else, but really recognizing that you have your own individual stories, your own individual voice, and that has valuable space for your audience out in the world as well. And so in terms of growing that knowledge and that talent, places like TAAFI, organizations that run different workshops and things, there are lots out there, lots of free resources to be able to grow your experience.
That's great. Lawrence.
And I think Karen hit on something really important there. It's not like we always think about change. We think, oh, the future is going to be AI or virtual production or something. But the reality is that they just become new tools in our toolbox, right? And so it's not change. It's just there's new options for us. And, I think taking that approach makes it a lot easier to learn and add things and, think about it. I'll throw in there that like TAAFI, VES has a lot of content that you don't have to be a member to access. You can just Google Visual Effects Society Vimeo, and there's a ton of great stuff from great panels and great educational sessions and things like that. So I'll second if you have time on your hands, use it to learn and add to your toolbox.
I also just want to take a quick second to to kind of leap off of what Lawrence was saying. And some of the things that I tell my students is that when AI first hit the scene and generative AI hit the scene, we were all very, very worried about, oh, this is going to steal all of our jobs. Or, we're very, very concerned about how this is going to impact us as artists. And what we're starting to see, and I wanted to say it here in this platform because it might not necessarily have hit the echo chambers of like Reddit or these other supportive places that people find their voices. But that AI in the hands, any technology in the hands of someone who has never done what we do as artists cannot hit the heights and the range that it can in the hands of the artists. So you can take someone who has never done art in their life and isn't an artist by trade, and you can give them a thing that they can create a video, but it doesn't tell stories in the same way that we can. It doesn't show meaning through this medium in ways that we can. So if you think about AI as a tool, and it's becoming more of that for us, in our hands, it has a lot more power than it ever would in someone else. So they're not going to take our jobs. We're always going to have control over that technology. We just have to take that.
Sherry.
Yeah, one thing I'd like to say is also is like we keep repeating the same things, and that's you will be able to get weird on any of these platforms, and the people in the past didn't want to get weird on platforms because it cost a lot of money to get something going. It had to get greenlit, and now that's no longer. You don't need anything to get greenlit, right? You could have your own YouTube channel. You could have any of these channels, and it could take off just by, just getting a great team together and working on your passion projects, and you'll be able to, do what the reason you got into this to begin with was to have your own products without, having your own boss to tell you what to do. It's all yours.
That's a good point. I mean, in preparation for this conversation, we talked a lot about the virtues of being a generalist versus a specialist. And I think that our educational opportunities in the province and our academic programs really prepare talent in all aspects of production. But then as you get out into the workforce, you become a bit more of a specialist. And that's just how things have worked. But it seems that there might be an opportunity to be a generalist in this current moment. So maybe I'll pass it to Lawrence.
I think you absolutely hit on, like we're going through a lot of change technologically, and it's starting to rewrite the lines of our departments. And so those specializations that we had before might be shifting a bit. And so, I think in light of that, being more of a generalist will allow people to be more versatile and do more with less, and keep jobs easier because they're more versatile.
Did you want to jump in, Sherry? Or?
I'll jump in just for a second because Lauren said something in the meet. So you guys are seeing like the end result of this. We actually had several meetings where we all kind of discussed what needed to be said. But Lauren said something that you need to be a specialist to get in and a generalist to stay. And what I think that means is that you need to pick something that means a lot to you, that you put that effort in so that you can show that you are being your best in that one thing, so people can recognize you for something. And then when you're there, you actually have to really understand the departments that are around you. For myself as a surfacing artist, I really need to know about modeling so that I know when a good model or a bad model reaches, my seat, and then I know from my job into who gets the things next. I need to make sure that it renders right, that it, doesn't have, too high density. And that's the kind of generalist type of knowledge that you need. You need to understand not only your specialty, but you have to understand the things around you too, in order to keep yourself hireable. I think that was important.
And I think with AI, you will have to be more of a generalist. Like right now, you graduate from school, you learn all these generalist things, but then you get into a studio and they pigeonhole you as like an animator, a modeler, and you only do that thing. And that's where the cycle goes through. So you'll be able to, if you're more of a generalist, because you're actually orchestrating this AI, and you'll be able to, once you learn all of it, be able to orchestrate it so that you can go from one to another. You don't have to wait for someone else to do it. You'll be able to do more. And again, create your own IP without having to have all these different disciplines.
Lawrence.
Yeah, and I think to Karen's point, creative vision is in many ways what sets us apart. And no matter what happens with the technology is going to change. That creative vision that we have, especially here in Ontario, I think is what we can always apply. It's what we can always bring to the table, and it can be something that sets us apart. So I kind of encourage, we're talking a lot about upskilling and learning about new technologies and things like that. I think that's just a piece of the puzzle. The other piece is maintaining and improving that creative vision that we have, because it will always be relevant.
Mm-hmm. And kind of what areas do you think are most important in terms of building business acumen in this current environment? And are there any programs that can assist with this?
And yeah, I think I'd love to hear from the panel here, because I don't know about the program side, but I think, having started a company and got into the VES, I see a big gap in knowledge and, financial awareness. One of the things we heard from a survey we ran was that the industry crisis kind of caught people off guard when it came to business skills and financial planning. And so I think that's another key area, and I'd love to hear.
Yeah, I know that the Creative School that we're all lovely here at today has a wonderful program that they've partnered with CASO in order to create. I think Melissa was talking about it a little bit earlier, and Michael, of course, was talking about that too, where they're literally teaching people producer skills, skills about the business of animation. And then there's that course at Seneca as well. Seneca Polytechnic has a budgeting for animation production. And that was, I took both of those because I'm also interested in upskilling. I'm an artist, and so I took both of those programs. And they're very good programs for teaching more of the business side, which is something that I was more interested in. As an artist, you only see kind of a very, myopic type of view of just the art side. You don't really see the business side. And when I started delving more into production and producing, you start to see a whole nother world to this. And I think that artists should really serve themselves by, taking these programs or others like them to learn more about how animation is produced and kind of why the studios are struggling the way they are. Because the studios are not, these overseers who are just like, no, we're just going to fire you so that we can get all the money. That's not what's happening. Studios are really struggling, and they're hurting too for not being able to keep people employed. It hurts them, because that's why we're here, is to work together.
That's a good point. I think everyone's feeling that same sense of anxiety.
I just wanted to jump in just along that lines, and to speak to the artists out there is, your portfolios, we're talking a lot about AI, we're talking a lot about tools. The reality is be yourself. Your portfolio, your demo reel, it's like a revolving door. Every time you experience something and you revise something, you're constantly replacing things in your portfolio. That make sure you focus on you. It's about branding yourself. Getting a job, you're part of a team, but you as an artist, that you have a passion as to why you're in this industry and why you're passionate about being here. So I think, and along the lines of what we just talked about, it's really important to just educate yourself. We all need to be responsible with AI, so I think it's important that you understand how to protect your IPs, how to protect your designs, your brands. I think that's really important, because as we see, there's a lot of content going straight to YouTube and to our social media platforms. Educate yourself so that you can protect your IPs, and that's really important. But as far as generalist versus specialist, I think that's what's really important, is right now there isn't a ton of jobs out there. So know what you're most passionate about, but have a couple other things in your back pocket that, hey, if a job opening opens up and I really want to be a character designer, but it's actually for layout, you know what? It's design, and I've loved that too. So that's really important, to just make sure you keep yourself nimble and flexible, so that it's about getting your foot in the door and really network. Networking is going to be essential right now for people to find their path forward.
I just want to go back to something that Lawrence was saying about the survey, and that people were unprepared for, budgeting, and, most people don't know how to budget. So I think there's a lot of studio owners here, and I think it would be great if you could maybe put some sort of budget on your website that people can use because they don't know how to do it. Some sort of template where they can use, or even have your benefits company, because I know, like, if you have benefits and you have, like, RBC will come in to do your RSPs or whatever it is, the bank will come in and teach them financial literacy. So that would, be a big help to your employees.
Kind of on that note, are there any resources out there where artists can start to understand their value, or their price point within this current marketplace? Krista and Sherry, I think we were talking about that in advance, but maybe Sherry, we'll just move forward with you and then hear your thoughts on that.
I think that the more data that we have on the industry of what, like, you've all been on Glassdoor and you've seen, like, each person depends on what location you are, how many years experience you have. That is what tells you what it is that your salary should be. And for this industry, we don't have that. So I think that would help studios budget, as well as then, and okay, this is something that, because I have access to, like, a lot of people, not just one particular studio, what'll happen is when there's a influx of work and artists are, in high demand, because there's no artists, studios are willing to pay a lot more. And the reason that they're willing to pay that is because the artist said that that's what their salary was, when I know that may not have been the case. So they're, like, really upping it up. It could be $15,000, $20,000 more, and the studio has to pay that because they need the work done. But if there is a standard, these things can't happen, and you're budgeting properly when it comes to budgeting, because you know that salary is not going to jump $20,000 because you're just so desperate to get someone.
That's so interesting. Krista, did you want to jump in on that?
That's a tricky one.
Tough conversation.
Well, it varies. The way that we build and cast teams and crews really are tailored to the budgets of the shows that we're working on. So, I think that we try to support, our crew as much as we can. But I would suggest, understanding the macroeconomics, the supply and demand, as an artist will really help you understand when you come to negotiating, where do I stand? Where are my strengths? And then just be cognizant that, again, it's we're putting pieces of a puzzle together. That's really what productions are, and each individual is a piece of that. So, I think just understanding that you need to be flexible, and that the studios are really looking to support and sustain an industry as much as we can.
That's so interesting. Thank you. I think we're starting to get to the end of the panel here. I think it would be great to just end this conversation by going down the line. We can just talk about one resource that we think artists should know about to help them on their way, or something you're seeing in the industry that you're excited about going forward, just to end this on a positive note. Lawrence, can I ask you to go first?
Yeah. I guess one tip I would just give, because I mentioned VES videos. That's a great place to start. But I think just what I'm seeing, just talking to a lot of people, there tends to be people will pigeonhole themselves. Like, you've been a compositor, for example, for a decade, and you'll say, okay, I'm a compositor. But what you're not thinking about is all the skills that you've built over that decade. Your leadership skills, the soft skills, creative skills, the composition, photographic skills. The list is huge. And I think people need to leverage those skills more, bring them more to the table, and sell them to people. You're not a compositor. You're an artist with all these many skills that can actually be applied to other roles and other careers. And so if I were to leave you with something, I hope it's that.
That's great. Melissa?
Kind of similar, really. It's, I just hope people don't lose hope. It is a time of change, but change is part of life. And I think what we have to stop doing is, well, but it was like this, or, but remember when it was like that. Those were great times too, but there's so much more to look forward to. And I think keep in mind what gets you up every day, what you're interested in, what you're passionate about, and network. I think that's, you know, the takeaway I'd love for people to hear is network, whether it's connecting on social media, know the free platforms where you can, you know, whether it's train, connect with folks, go to industry events, be aware of what's happening, and, you know, bring that passion back into what's driving you every single day. And get weird and be yourself.
That's great. Karen?
Well, Melissa just told all of the points. I was also, I'm going to self-plug for half a second because TAAFI is a really important event that happens. And I don't say that just because I work for TAAFI, but because I even, you know, in my younger days and attending TAAFI just as an attendee, it was a really, really important catalyst for projecting you know, myself in my career, largely because not only of the learning and connection opportunities, but networking is humongous. And that's the takeaway. Even if you don't want to attend TAAFI for whatever reason, networking is really, really huge, especially in this time that, you know, a lot of people aren't working, that they actually have a little bit more time to connect with you. As an industry, I've never met people in other industries who are as willing to support the next generation of creators, and, you know, wanting to connect. I feel like at any time you can connect with someone who you look up to or who does the thing that you want to do as a student, and connect with them, and they're willing to share their advice, and then, you know, that becomes a resource for you later in life too.
That's great. Sherry?
Yes, I have to agree. Networking is important to get involved in, because you don't want to just wait when something goes bad or that you need a job that you're reaching out to people. You want to be connected with people. You want to be in the know. You want to attend TAAFI, because what we notice is it's all usually very young people that go to TAAFI. It's not usually, you know, the veterans that go, unless they're looking for a job. And go support the younger generation, support TAAFI, because without these types of associations, you know, these conversations can't exist.
Thanks. Krista, you get the last word.
I mean, I think just a lot more of the same. You know, community is big, as we can see here tonight. You know, the Toronto community, whether it's for artists, students, stakeholders, it's big. Being able to lean on each other, you know, through good times and bad is a great thing. So reach out to your trade organizations, the VES, CASO, and understand the industry. Create your own brand. What is your brand? You know, how are you going to stand out in the crowd? And I'm also a huge proponent of LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn is amazing, not only for representing yourself, but for networking and following up and making sure you stayed connected with people. There's a lot of intelligence on LinkedIn.
Yeah, no kidding. Okay, great. Thank you all. I think we've got a time for a few questions. Sadly, I don't think we could take questions from our online folks tuning in, but are there any questions in the room? Yeah.
Guys, amazing panel. Thank you so much for sharing all your perspectives. It's been really insightful, really insightful. I do want to bring an image that was shown by Mark earlier today. That's the gap that we have between resources, the industry, the colleges, the middle, the pitfall that's there, and actually the other sides that's the actual realization of your profession, right? I would love to see the offerings of fundings for our students once they kind of finish the college. I would love to see CASO and other institutions to be present not only at college level, but also at a high school level, showing the power that Ontario has in a professional pathway that has led to many of us here to great professional journeys. And And I would love to see that, happening, because it's really awesome to see the work our students do in those opportunities. But they want to have a team, they have the team, but they don't have access to budget, and they are just really early. They need seed investment in the end of the day. And I would love to see that opportunity for new IPs, not only for our great Ontario studios, but also for our students that are doing such amazing work.
Fantastic question. And I'm going to call on a friend here to field that. So I'm going to turn it over to Mark, but I think the question is, how can industry trade organizations be more involved in the post-secondary or high school level to make people aware of the opportunities that are out there and what programs exist to help?
Sure. And I'm mainly coming at it from the education side of the spectrum. You've got a lot of great folks up here representing organizations that do that work with government, do that work with what are the new discussions that have to happen around policy making. We have great support organizations now, but there's a phenomenon that's happening. And the phenomenon is something has emerged in the creative economy globally that doesn't necessarily fit the models of what we've been discussing up to now, which is the independent creator economy, which has largely been driven by a lot of these technologies. So the question that remains is, well, then, therefore, what is the responsibility of the education system to prepare any creative professional, emerging creative professional, to actually get the skills to understand that that is now part of the business as well? What do you need to know in order to lean into that part of the economy? And then what are the policy questions that have to be asked from a government funding level to actually provide support for when that emerging talent actually graduates from school? So these are important questions. I have a lot of optimism on this because you've got a lot of great organizations all trying to solve the same sets of questions, and that includes the education community. And I think we have work to do, but thank you for raising the question.
I do also want to say that, while there hasn't been a lot of support financially for high schools and stuff, our organizations, like TAAFI, for example, as well as Nelvana, has also worked with the TDSB in order to increase exposure of high school students to the industry, both from a mentorship perspective and working directly with the students, as well as TAAFI this year has a fully high school student block, which gives high school students the opportunity to have their films shown in an international film festival, and we wanted to support the TDSB students in that way. So.
And at Ontario Creates, we've worked very closely with organizations like Real Canada to promote the job opportunities in the visual effects and animation sector as well. That helps high school students who aren't quite sure where to land in the industry really input all of their passions, whether it's administrative or math or sciences or creative endeavors. And have that really give them all of the list of job opportunities that are available in the industry. So I think a lot of work's being done. Even, going back to some of what Mark was saying, there is an organization called HOMAD. It's a committee of the heads of media, art, and design for the colleges across the province. And they're all thinking about how to develop those curriculums in a better way to react to what the needs of the industry are. And we've had a seat at that table, and CASO has as well, to really help spark that conversation. So is there another question? Yeah. Sorry, one second.
Thank you. Okay, great. Hi, my name is Kate. After listening tonight, I think I've just kind of learned we just need another Alliance Atlantis to show up in Toronto and fix things. But my question kind of relates to something that was an earlier topic. There seemed to be a lot of debate on, this seems to be a constant problem for the Canadian industry of getting people interested in Canadian content and getting the entire world interested in Canadian content. So, and there's a whole other talk about CanCon, but is there any laws or anything is there any push or movement to try and even get streaming services to feature Canadian content, either on Canadian Netflix or really randomly throughout the world? Like, is there any hope on the horizon for that?
I'll jump in. We're working on a Netflix Canada production, one of the first two, Wayward. So I think that there is a strong domestic market here, and the streamers are supporting homegrown talent and homegrown stories. I think that we are, we're in growth mode, and we do comedies really well, and I think that you'll continue to see a lot more scripted series coming out in the future.
Are there other questions? Yeah.
I work as a visual development and the background artist, and for the most part, I was working in 3D projects, and I was just wondering, and I'm always open-minded about AI. I've touched, ChatGPT, Midjourney, and as a visual development artist, I'm just curious, what are the best ways to introduce myself to AI, and how can I implement it in my visual storytelling? Because I know we cannot do storytelling as good as artists, and where ways. It's going to be at some point, but right now it can't. And I'm just wondering, how can I, implement my skills and AI to go along with times and, be more open and open to the industry?
I'll jump in there. I think, with my students, I kind of encourage them to look at Comfy UI, which is a platform, really. It makes it easy to explore different approaches. And that if you learn that, then you can very easily kind of pick up these different models that are coming out and explore what they're capable of, instead of kind of locking yourself down to one particular service. I think it's good at some things and not good at others. Like it's really good at exploring an idea and generating like 200 different things from this prompt, but that doesn't always help you get to that final image. And so I think that you've got to figure out how to bring your creative vision to it in a unique way and allow it to expand what you're capable of doing. Because ultimately just typing in a prompt and getting that image is not gonna do it, right? It's a tool that's gonna help you get to that. So, we've seen scenarios where clients sometimes don't know what they want. When they know what they want, it's probably better just to draw it. But when they don't know what they want, giving them like 100 different things and saying, point to the one that speaks to you, that's an opportunity. And then you can take that and really put your effort into that. And then you're not fighting with your client trying to figure out where to go, right? So I think it's not just the platform, it's also how you approach it from a business and, workflow with your client perspective. So.
And I was just going to add to that is it's not going to replace the creative. And that's, I think, the key is, as a producer, if I look at where can I find an efficiency in my pipeline, that's where you may look at AI as far as like the rendering. It can speed up that time, that turnaround. We're already seeing that difference from, Arnold rendering to Unreal rendering of a full-on production. But I think that's the thing to remind yourself is it's not here to replace what makes you unique and what your brand is, and as an artist, what you input. I'm looking at, character designing. I'm thinking, what if you do a 3/4 front and a back and maybe a profile, and with a click of a button, how fast can it rotate that for you? It didn't give you the character design. It didn't zero in on the details and what is so unique about the character and story. It's how can it execute it a little quicker? You think of back in the day when we went, when the microwave came out, everybody, oh my gosh, we can heat our food in how many minutes? We won't go into plastic and all that. But I'm just saying, it's a tool. It literally is just something, I think people shouldn't fear it, but also all of us in the industry, studios, we have to be responsible with it. So if you start putting your artwork up, is it protected? Like there's things to make sure you're asking yourself, but definitely from an execution and an efficiency perspective of getting, if you're gonna wanna make your own film and you're doing backgrounds and it's a visual film and you're gonna compose it and that's gonna be the film you make. What ways can AI execute some of those parts of the process for you a little bit faster? But it still is going to be unique because it's the creators that it's a tool. Yeah.
Great. Are there any other questions?
So recently, because of the government, they have canceled many international programs, including animation and VFX. So I have two questions. The first one is, due to the cancellation of these programs or suspension, how do you guys see that this is going to impact like the future of the industry? And my second question is, the conversation has also been revolved around AI. Do you guys see in the future that AI can be taught as a subject in animation or visual effects?
Yeah, I mean, I think those are good questions. I think personally the concepts of AI should be being taught now. It is wildly, I mean, I won't lie, I put together a class and then I had to throw it out because everything I did was obsolete within 3 months. But I think there's an opportunity, things are going to stabilize first, and there's an opportunity to get in front of it from an education perspective. I don't know what to say about the changes to the programs in Ontario because of various different governments and what's happening with work permits. I really hope it's a temporary thing that we just have to work through and things will pick up, but maybe there's other people more qualified here to dig in.
I mean, from a funding point of view, really there haven't been that many changes, and the changes that have been made have typically been positive, opening up additional funding through our IP fund for domestic production, and a strengthening and stabilization of our tax credits. So maybe we could talk after and kind of get a little deeper into some of those programs that you're talking about. But I'm seeing a very stable landscape going forward. Did anyone else want to jump in?
Yeah, you asked two questions. One was basically the IRCC decision, and that's obviously been very challenging for every industry, but our industry specifically, because we do get a lot of talent from abroad that come into our schools to learn what we know and what we do, and it helps support our programs. And there's a whole conversation here as well about the exploitation of international students, in terms of the tuition rates being 4 times as much as they were for domestic students, which is not right. But for the IRCC to decide that 3D animation and visual effects didn't have any STEM in them, that's a problem when our artists use math and engineering and science every single day, alongside their art. So I think that decision has and will continue to have huge impacts in our industry that we haven't really seen the impacts of just yet, because it's still too new. And then with regards to teaching, because I teach in the animation programs as well, with regards to teaching AI, I wouldn't see it taught as a subject specifically, but like, Lawrence is saying that the technology is evolving so quickly that it's really hard to kind of develop a curriculum, get that curriculum approved, and then teach it. There's a lot more flexibility actually in the high schools to adjust to that type of learning, where they have a lot more flexibility with what they teach their students. But as a tool, we can definitely start learning how to do that. But a lot of the teachers don't even know how to use AI. They know what they know because that's what they did in the industry. And the industry is changing right now so rapidly that it's actually difficult for a lot of us to really understand how it's changing and how to really grasp it. So it's a lot of uncertainty, sorry.
Great, I think we've got time for one last question. You had your hand up first.
Yeah, Sabrina.
Thank you for the panel. It was awesome. I had 2 questions. I hope that they're both short, but my first question was related to animation. And so I think we had some stats about production volumes in Ontario doubling, as well as location scouting increasing. And so I was just wondering, for animation, do we have a sense of what kind of movement is happening as far as jobs coming back or productions coming back? And my second question was about AI. Is there any concern that using AI in a portfolio might actually backfire against you because like a recruiting person taking a look at your work might not have a sense of what you actually did on it? And so I was just curious, like, how do we get a sense of somebody's skill if a lot of it is being enhanced by AI?
I think I can field the first question about production volume. It's a lot easier for us to track live action production. We work very closely with the unions to understand what's on their hot lists and their rumor lists. And of course, productions also come in for their tax credits through Ontario Creates, and we were able to absorb data from that. But with visual effects and animation, there's always a bit of a lag time in terms of what we can report on. And so we're going through the process of tracking all of our calendar year production stats from last year. And I think that's going to provide some really interesting insight into the visual effects and animation side of things. But as for the AI question.
I think it's a really good question, and I think it applies to just generally to portfolios. There's a lot of times we get a portfolio from a student, we're like, what did they do on this? Did they download the model? Did they do the textures? So having production blog or breakdowns or showing your work, I think is the critical part there, because not only does it prove, yes, you did it, but it also shows your thought process and how you approach a problem. And it helps employers, I think, a lot to understand you as a hire. And I think AI just fits in there. And I think if you go on Midjourney and make an image and throw it on your demo reel, people are going to be like, why'd you do that? We can do that too. But if you, let's say, use AI, like I had a student sitting right there who we were trying to work on a project where we had to explore a bunch of different ideas for lighting a room. And he grabbed AI and tried some things out and said, okay, what if we explore all these different ideas? Then picked one and worked on it. And I thought that was a really cool use. I think that's a really cool thing you could show in the portfolio to solve use AI to solve a real problem. So
I think that's a really good way to put it, is that if you're going to use AI in your portfolio and you get hired by a studio, what if they're not using it? So maybe ask yourself, to your point, show how you used it and why you chose to use it, because that's a really good skill. Troubleshooting when you're in production is essential. You can't predict problems that come up. So I think that's a really good way to just ask yourself, why am I using AI right now? And make it a conscious tool that you're choosing. But keep in mind that not everybody's using it the same way. So you want to make sure that it's representing your work and your abilities, and that's what you're trying to brand yourself and put yourself forward when you're applying.
Okay, so unfortunately we can't take any more questions. We've run out of time, but I do know that all of our panelists will be here after the conversation, so please do connect with everyone. I've heard some really interesting things on this panel. I've certainly learned a lot. I think that despite some of the turbulence that we're moving through right now, we've got many steady hands on the tiller, and really, I think we've got a very strong future in Ontario if we're able to adjust and accommodate for some of these shifts. And certainly I'm very excited about the future. I'd like to thank our panelists. I'd like to thank TAAFI, VES, and CASO for organizing this. And also to TMU for hosting this event. It's been fantastic. So Michael, I'll pass it back to you.
So thank you, everybody, for, I know it was a cold night. Hopefully it isn't raining or snowing out there when you get out. We're going to leave the room open for about 25, 30 minutes if you want to have a conversation with some of the panel members or yourselves. I'd like to thank Bradley Bolton. Bradley, behind the screen. Yeah. One-man show here at the Catalyst, and I'm very happy to have him as a partner to offer this. And to my graduate students out in the back, thanks everybody for volunteering. You're not off the hook yet, but we're close. Anyways, thank you very much, everybody, and feel free to stick around if you'd like to. Cheers.